What is up, guys? Jay Sensational here, coming back again today with the deck guide for my Aphelios Heimer deck list that I've been running. It's been a lot of fun with Aphelios release, and now that we're kind of coming up to the seasonals, it's definitely on the horizon of a deck that I am considering bringing, but there's quite a few nuances within it that I'd also like to cover within this deck guide. So if you've been enjoying the video so far, please do give a like and a subscribe. Really helps me out, and let's jump right into it. So without further ado, let's just go through some of the essential cards within this deck that kind of make it work. The first thing that kind of comes to your eye is the champion selection. For this current deck list, I've opted to run one Zoe, three Aphelios, and two Heimerdingers, and I've played with quite a lot of different champion selections in the past. I don't deem that this is the most optimal build of this kind of version, and there's a lot of discussion to be had surrounding the champion choices. But the only thing that we can all agree upon is that this is an Aphelios deck, meaning that there are going to be three copies of Aphelios. Now, one of the big reasons we want to play Aphelios is because Crescendum can pull out a 2-drop from our deck. And our 2-drop of choice is Ballistic Bot. And because we're generating ignitions from Ballistic Bot, we can run cards like Spacey Sketcher for Celestials, Sump Treasure for additional card draw, and we have a one of Rummage. Now, because we are also in a PNZ control shell, we also have the very typical tools such as Thermal Beam, Mystic Shot, Get Excited, Aftershock, and Tribeam. And of course, with any very slow control-based target deck, we are running three copies of Star Shaping as kind of a main win condition to generate you a really big body to kind of close out game. We are also running two copies of Veil Temple because I think it is a really good card, and in a more control-oriented deck where you are a little bit more mana hungry, Veil Temple can be really crucial between that early to mid game to really solidify your advantage. Now, you'll also notice a one copy of Give It All, which I think pairs pretty well if you're deciding to go with Heimer as a champion, because not only do you get a wide board state, you can also give all your units augment, and when then you further play bots from Heimer or spells from Aphelios, you can pretty much scale all of your units. And so if I think that if you're playing Heimer in a sort of this list, then a card like Give It All makes a lot of sense. But now let's talk about the champion selection, and which I think is one of the more interesting discussions to be had within this deck. And there are a lot of different choices and a lot of decks that you've probably seen yourself running on ladder. Most commonly with Aphelios in PNC, you might have seen Victor or Vi. I've seen a few Ezreal lists running around. Some just opt to only play Zoe and Aphelios. And then I've been experiencing a little bit with Heimer. I think all of the four different champion kind of selections have a little bit of deck construction that's required and kind of do a little bit of a different thing. So for example, deck that's running like either Victor or Vi aims to use them in addition with Aphelios to kind of act as an alternative win condition, right? You commit a lot of mana into cards like Victor by playing the Hex score upgrades, or you're playing a lot of like cards and buffs onto Vi and then hoping to like cast Infernum to give them Overwhelm as kind of an alternate win condition. Um, the kind of downside to this is that it's very committal into one card. So if you play against like a Hush deck, or they obliterate either your Victor or your Vi, then you kind of lose one of these win conditions. And if you try to build a deck that's a little bit more focused into all ending on these, then that might not be the best outcome for you. Moving on to Ezreal next, I think Ezreal probably has the highest deck building requirement out of all these different champions, simply because you need to add a little bit more cards that target your enemies. So cards that come to mind are like Static Shocks or Gotchas even, things like that. Now, of course, Ezreal as a champion gives you a little bit extra reach because after Ezreal levels up, each spell you cast deals either 1 or 2 damage to the enemy nexus. I think that sometimes as you can kind of get baited into trying to like go for an Ezreal because you have to be using a lot of your cards like Mystic Shots and Get Excited to remove the enemy boards. And that's totally fine because that's kind of what your deck is supposed to do, but I'll also touch up on that topic a little bit later. Zoe is probably the one that I've probably not experimented with the most. Zoe acts as like a very cheap value generator and threatens the opponent, that if you level up Zoe, then you probably win the game, right? So there's very little downside to Zoe. You don't necessarily have to build around Zoe, and it's relatively easy to level with Aphelios, right? You probably get 2 cards off of Zoe and then 4 cards off of Aphelios, and then you're pretty close to leveling up. And you can add in like Pales, Vigors, or even like suit ups to kind of help keep Zoe alive. And then finally we come to Heimer. Heimer in itself, in this meta, of course, is kind of poor. It never really had a really comfortable spot to be played out. It's a 5 mana 1/3. That's a lot of tempo loss, and if it gets removed on the play that or if it gets removed on the turn that you play it, then like you cast like 1 or 2 spells and generate like a 2/1 and a 1/1, and that never really feels that great. Of course, in decks that have a really hard time removing Heimerdinger, it can generate you a lot of value and be able to gain a lot of board control with the bots that you get. Um, I think that in addition, another kind of topic that comes into deciding what champions you want to put into your deck is also the idea of what you want to hit off of Written with the Stars. I think this is a little bit more of a corner case, but I think that you're often finding Written in the Stars to pull 2 mana 5/5 Aphelios from your deck, and that can be really powerful because Aphelios is one of the main core engines of this deck. So if you're thinking about that, I found that pulling a card like Vi or Victor off of Written in the Stars can often feel really, really bad. This makes targets like Ezreal, Zoe, and Heimer a lot better. And if you have a 4 mana 3/5 Heimer, then that really helps its survivability and its upside as well. So this is kind of the ideas that I've been thinking about when thinking about like what champion selections you want to put in. Now, of course, cards like Vi and Victor can sometimes just high roll the game because your opponent sometimes can't deal with like a 12/4 overwhelm Vi, or you give like Victor elusive and scout and like scale its attack or something. But when you're playing this deck, you can also tweak around with whatever fits your playstyle the best. And to quickly go over how exactly we want to think about playing this deck, it's quite relatively simple. We have a lot of the standard PNZ and targeting control tools, such as Thermo Beam, Mystic Shot, Get Excited, and Tribeam and Probulator to really, control the opponent's board while trying to develop your board yourself. For bigger targets, we do have the option of getting Fallen Comet from Solari Priestess, or even like Meteor Shower to stabilize the board or get rid of a big threat. And of course, we have the Star Aphelios, which you can not only thin out your deck by pulling out ballistic bots, you have tools like Calibrum and Gravitum to really control your board state, but you can also like threaten them with Infernum or Severum that can be really, really powerful. And once you get through the early game, you're using some of your control tools, you're getting to the end stage of the game. We do have cards like Heimerdinger to either generate us a wide board and then you give it all down and hope the opponent can't deal with it, and then you probably win the game there. Or you have the option of using your star shaping to find like a Great Beyond, Scourge, Living Legends, or anything like that to really close out the game. And then finally, the last topic I do want to touch on, up on, that I think is really important to the mindset of playing this deck and kind of why I think of PNZ Aphelios kind of works, is the fact that you should not underestimate the reach of the burn within your deck. Now, what I mean by this is Aphelios can give you Calibrum, which is a 2-mana deal 3, right? So when you're getting removal from your Aphelios, that saves you like a get excited that you would have used instead to be used on the opponent's nexus. Because we have Aphelios, we have so much more unit-based removal than we did before it. And this means that we can save our cards like Mystic Shot, Get Excited, and Aftershock to, instead of being used them as removal cards because we already have Aphelios, we can instead use them on the opponent's nexus. And because we are running 3 copies of Mystic Shot, 3 copies of Get Excited, and 1 copy of Aftershock, that's what? 6 plus 9 plus 3 damage. That's 18 damage of burn. And not to mention, we are running 3 copies of Ballistic Bot, which can just push the damage over the top. In theory, you could kill the opponent without even touching them. But of course, that's probably not going to happen because this deck is lacking a little bit on draw. But that's kind of how you want to think about it. And sometimes when you're thinking about, do I want to use this Mystic Shot or do I want to use a Thermo Beam instead, you have to consider, is this a matchup where you need to use burn on the opponent's nexus? And there definitely are some matchups where that is the case, such as against a deck like Anivia Control. So when you're playing, keep in mind that don't be tunnel visioned into using Mystic Shot or Get Excited as a removal card, but give them the flexibility of just targeting the opponent's nexus. And lastly, we do have let's try that again. 3, 2, 1. And lastly, we do have 3 games that I have prepared for you guys to kind of showcase how exactly the deck plays out and how exactly we want to think about going into each of these matchups. The first game is against Anivia Control, in which case you definitely want to be saving a lot of your burn to be used on the opponent's nexus. They Who Endure, which is pretty much a more typical control matchup. And then finally, we have a little fun game of against GP Sej, where cards like Veil Temple really come out to shine. So that's it for the guide part. I will leave you guys with some of the gameplay footage. I have been streaming a lot, or not a lot, but I have been streaming a little bit more on Twitter. So if you want to catch me live, there is a link down below, and just give me a follow and you'll be notified when I'm live. Also follow me on Twitter if you want to be up to date on what exactly I'm doing. I am preparing for the seasonals, so I've been slacking a little bit more on the YouTube content, so I'm trying to keep these as consistent as possible. But that's it for the guide part. Please do stick around for the games because I think that they're really great representation of how the deck turns out. But I hope you guys all enjoyed or learned something from the deck, and I thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you guys next time. Alright, so for the first matchup here, we are up against Anivia Control. This deck list I'm running was actually an older one, so you only see 3 Aphelios, 3 Heimer, but the playstyle should be pretty similar. In this matchup, you really want to get some early damage in with like ballistic bots, and so that in the later game you have a lot of burn in hand, so you can just like really burn them out. So this one drop is really good here, especially since we're attacking on odds, and the Dust Petal into Aphelios on 3 is really strong play that you can make. And in the hand we also see, 3 drops with the Tri-Beam. It's usually a pretty good start here. The awkward thing is, once you play Dust Petal into Aphelios only costs 2 mana and that doesn't actually proc your Tri-Beam. But in this case, developing Aphelios is just really good. The earlier we're pulling out Ballistic Bot, the earlier we're getting ignitions to discard or to just start paying down his Nexus health. And since we are attacking on odds again, developing a 3-drop into this attack is good. And unless he has exactly like Avalanche into Vile Feast, this line is pretty fun. Vile Feast coming out here means he doesn't have Avalanche, otherwise he probably would have Avalanched into Vile. So we could either just attack, we can kind of safely attack into here, knowing that he doesn't have it, and just trade out this 1/1 if he wants to. Surprisingly, he doesn't decide to do it and decides to go for an Entree instead. I'm not quite sure why. Perhaps he's thinking that he could chump block something bigger in the future. Or he's just gonna like Catalyst to heal it back. But either way, he lets it through, and we have a pretty good turn to play Crescendum here. I'll have to play Solari first, just to make use of our mana. Falling Comet's generally pretty good, but now that Anivia lists have Gluttony in their deck lists, it becomes a lot harder to use. And second Vile Feast. I guess just setting up some blockers here. We played the Solari first to set up the second card as Crescendum, I'd want to assume. I think the only fear here was just developing into an Avalanche, but if he did an Avalanche like the turn before, then it's unlikely that he has in hand. I already committed one card into getting closer to this Aphelios. It's probably best that I play it now. This, picking the Severum was actually in mind to heal the Aphelios, to keep it outside of Avalanche range. And the cool thing about Aphelios in PNZ with ballistic bots is that Severum, or any of the spells rather, actually just boosts the attack power of ballistic bot. And you know, it becomes even more powerful if you Infernum your ballistic bots, give it +2 attack and overwhelm, and then plus another attack from the spell itself. So in this mid game, we're just trying our best to maximize damage. I'm not quite sure what I phased from this Severum, but I hopefully phased Infernum. Yeah, so I took Infernum to use on this ballistic bot. And if once I do, it becomes a 6/4 overwhelm, and that's really powerful in pushing damage through these 1/1 spiders. And this is pretty much what we're doing, right? We're setting up, you know, the Aphelios and then a unit in order to get chip damage through here. If he has Grasp, that kind of blows us out here, which would definitely suck. But I think this is kind of a misplay from our opponent. He decides to Vengeance our Aphelios and leaves up this Ballistic Bot, which practically deals 5 damage if he blocks. And he doesn't block again, which is also another strange play. I don't think our opponent's playing this, you know, the best that he should be. Because now that he's down to 9 health, he's getting in range of our burn cards. We know he drew Anivia, and so there's no real reason to have to develop more into this board, so we can just take this nice soft pass with this Ignition, while also threatening his health total. And I think it's a pretty easy pass here. Because we have 5 damage of burn in hand, 6 with this Ignition, we can kind of take it slow, and if he wants to pass all of his mana to, you know, threaten an Anivia development, that's perfectly fine with us, because we're totally happy if he wants to spend 6 mana on Anivia. Means that he spends less mana on heal spells. And because we know that he Vengeance the Aphelios earlier, I think it's pretty safe to say that he doesn't really have Grasp, which he should have used on the Ballistic Bot instead. Taking this Comet here on the Anivia is kind of a risky play. I think that he would always hold Glimpse Beyond or Gluttony in hand if he had it. And so I just opt to play Sump Dredger to kind of cycle through my deck to find a few more burn cards, which I actually do. This is one of the few instances where, you know, Heimer isn't that great of a card. Playing the bots with 1 health into an Anivia doesn't really quite accomplish anything, and if you're trying to attack, they just run like Withering Wail, things like that. And there is the Gluttony that he had in hand, and which would have rendered our Comet a pretty bad play that turn as well. But because he spent his whole turn playing Anivia into Gluttony, it means that our burn cards have a lot higher potential in ending the game. And so we're just trying to maximize how much damage we can push this turn again. He has 5 blockers, I have 4 attackers. It's unlikely that we're getting too much damage through. His Anivia is not really leveling anytime soon, And so I think that the best use of our mana is actually to just Mystic Shot his face. Because the way we're winning this game is just by pressuring him out, and we are generating 2 more ignitions on the following turn, which gives us the range of 1 Mystic Shot, right? And because he's only on 9 mana, he has to heal another 4 health to stay alive. And that have to be a combination of like a Vile Feast with a Withering and Grasp, and he already played 2 Vile Feasts, so now he can't like double Withering, for example. So he's actually pretty close to dying here. Unfortunately, the Mystic Shot means that we can't deny this this glimpse, sorry, but he spent 2 more mana to pretty much do nothing now, and these Get Exciteds are just pretty much ending the game this turn. The max he can heal here is probably around 3, and so I think this is pretty GG. So the turn where we got that Infernum on the Ballistic bot into face, just really close out the game. Because now, look at him, he played Rekindler to, try to develop his side of the board, but that meant that he couldn't heal, and it allowed us to burn him out with our Get Excited. So next matchup here, we are up against They Who Endure list, which you don't really quite see often running around ladder these days. But the main idea of this matchup is that we are trying to just really control the game down and just outvalue our opponent. We are running 2 copies of Hush to really counter their They Who Endure, and if they just decide to play it on curve, we also have the option of getting Falling Comet off of Solari Priestess. You'll notice in this game I am running a version that has 2 Heimers and 1 Vi. I was just testing it out because one Vi seemed kind of good, especially paired with Aphelios, just granting it Severum or Infernum can be really powerful. And in this particular matchup against They Who Endure, Vi actually, can get in without having to worry about much counterplay. So these first 2 turns are quite simple. We did hit our high roll, which is the Dust Petal person into Aphelios, and that's kind of the main curve that you're looking for. I could play this Calibrum or this Solari into these challengers, but I don't feel the need of it necessarily, and I can Mystic Shot his 3-2 instead, just saving us a little bit of health, because the way we lose this game is if he gets like a very big They Who Endure and just atrocities it at our face if we try to like Falling Comet it, for example, without a Hush in hand. So just making sure that our health total is relatively high is quite important. And of course we are running 3 copies of Star Shaping, so we have a little bit of just like a safety net out. You notice that even though the Mystic Shot fizzled because he glimpsed his 0 mana 3/2 card, it still counted towards Aphelios, and that's something important just to note. I could have picked Calibrum here, but I just chose Severum because it heals up my Aphelios by another 2 health, and keeping my Aphelios alive here to like a second caretaker, or just in case he like top decks a Vile Feast in the future, I felt it to be relatively valuable. It's just a little unfortunate we weren't able to get the Vi to level up this turn. We were if we used Severum on our Vi and then just Thermal Beam for 0, we could have gone Vi to 10 attack, but I don't think that was worth it. See Callista come down here, that's kind of fine. We do have a lot of tools to kill Callista here, and he doesn't really have that great of an open attack either. Curse Keeper, little scary, could mean second caretaker, which would threaten our Aphelios. We don't really have too much of a play here. I think it's just Solari into Tribeam on the Callista. Sorry, not Tribeam, Thermobeam, and it kind of works out. We have a 3 drop into a 3 drop. And there's unfortunately no way of protecting our Aphelios. Interesting. So I go for the Groudum here just to cycle another Moon Weapon from the Aphelios. And I'm not I'm not entirely sold if this was the correct line. I could have easily just Thermo Beamed the Callista and, you know, gone pretty much the same result. But, oh, I see. I wanted the Infernum because I had a 10 attack Vi on board, and if I got this 10 damage through, well, Vi with the Overwhelm through, I could probably top deck into like a burn card to pretty much win the game. So that was my rationale there. Could I have... Couldn't I have just... Oh, right, because if I didn't play Gravitum, I wouldn't have cycled into Infernum. So, interesting line by me. I think because I had Vi on board, this was the right line to take. And this is kind of a weird corner case misplay for me. I choose to use the Ignition Shot just as a soft pass to see what he does before going for this Infernum. But because he has a Callista on board and I gave him priority to play his 3-2, it actually procced Black Spear for him, and I actually get kind of blown out here. I suddenly just lost my Vi, and now I'm not even pushing damage, and I'm kind of forced into this Thermo Beam on the Callista. And he even has a glimpse to kind of punish me for it. And so suddenly I'm in a really bad spot playing from behind. Luckily I have this Tribeam. I'm not quite sure what it's at right now, but I kind of need it to bail me out here. Or this is like a Heimer game, assuming he doesn't have exactly They Who Endure, and it doesn't seem like the case. So if he pretty much jammed They Who Endure here, at least I have a Falling Comet, I guess, but I'd be in a pretty precarious spot. I'm here's fine. I think Ender decks don't run cards like Vile Feast or anything like that anymore, so leaving Heimer down to 1 health is perfectly fine. I take the rummage here, just looking for a few more control tools that I could get use of. I'm mostly trying to find a Hush, because at this point of the game, he's going to be able to play the Hunder and have mana for Atrocity as well, which means that Falling Comet is pretty much a dead card. And so I'm just doing my best to cycle through my deck in hopes of hitting Comet. Or sorry, Hush. He hits the Stalking Shadows, cycling closer and closer to his Zayunder, and so I'm actually on a pretty tight clock here. I need to close out the game, or draw into Hush first before he drops his They Who Endure. Unspeakable Horror. Kind of a strange card coming out of my opponent. I take that back about not running pings or anything like that. So that was definitely really sad to see come out of my opponent, because I had a lot of value I could have also generated from the Heimer, and in this particular board state I think it would have come really into hand. Oh wow, these Tribeams are actually really low scaled, so the Solari boosts my Tribeam to 3, and I find Written the Stars, which most likely finds me Aphelios, and that hopefully just pulls me out of this game. You know, I can find like Severum or Gravitum on this Ballistic bot, and maybe it just kind of gets me there. I shouldn't hopefully play this ignition first because I need the ignition to proc to get the second card off of Aphelios. Um, Actually I can't. I don't have enough mana. So we see the Dayhunder 16/16, very scary. But luckily the Aphelios was leveled up, so I can get a 0 cost or 1 cost grab them. Alternatively, I could have played a Petal into Aphelios, into Gravitum and Petal. Wait. No, that wouldn't have worked, unfortunately. I was 1 mana short. I was thinking about some way where I could have just cycled 2 Aphelios weapons, but this outcome is pretty fine. The Dayhunder can't attack this turn, and he doesn't have mana to play Atrocity. So this pretty much gives me exactly 1 turn to draw Hush. And, you know, like a good player, that's exactly what happens. So, even if he goes for the Atrocity, I have the Hush, and that pretty much prevents any damage coming out of my opponent. And Aphelios at 2 health is perfectly fine. I took Infernum because I have this Ballistic buff. And so my goal here is just to clean up the board, set up this Infernum on the Ballistic bot, and hopefully just win from there. And this is kind of where like Tri-Beam comes into play a little bit more. It not only kills a unit from the opponent's board, it also helps you set up a unit on your own to kind of help tempo out your opponent. This talking is really hard, I'm sorry. This Puff Cap Peddler is actually kind of nuts because we are actually putting some shrooms into his deck. Now, they don't really matter because we don't run cards like Hexcore Foundry in our lists, but if you like top decks 1 or 2 shrooms, then that just helps out our overall game plan a little bit more. Now, of course, we're never dropping below Hush mana because he's not dropping below Atrocity mana, but our turn here is simply just to play Infernum, and then hopefully we win because we have the Hush. And it seems that he drew an Atrocity off of his Glimpse, but luckily we had the Hush here, and so that his Dayhunder is only dealing 1 damage with the Atrocity. And this pretty much spells victory for us. And, you know, the icing on the cake is... Ooh, if he had a second Doom Beast, we actually kind of lose, huh? Let's see what I do. Because I think I end up going for this Give It All, just to guarantee. Oh, okay, because he tapped under. I played Ignition again just to see if he would have played the second Doom Beast in case he got it off of Stalking Shadows, and so I kept mana for Star Shaping up before I committed to this Give It All. And now that he's dropped it exactly 0 mana, this Give It All just solidifies our victory here. Finally, we have a little bit of an interesting game here against a GP Sejuani deck. And so in this role, we are definitely playing a little bit more of a control list instead of a, aggressive list with ballistic bots, swinging in with Infernum type of thing, because they're mostly aiming to trigger plunders on every turn. We are, of course, always very happy to see Aphelios in our starting hand. And Temple and Heimer aren't bad depending on what kind of board state we're facing on turns 4 and 5. Unfortunately, we don't have our Duskbringer, or whatever it's called, the 1-drop 2/1, paired with our Aphelios here to just Nightfall it out on turn 3. And I really don't think you can afford to not Nightfall out Aphelios in these cases. Because he attacked with his Jagged Butcher, and knowing that his deck really wants to capitalize on getting getting damage through every turn, I actually go for this really aggressive Get Excited just to kind of slow down his game plan. And given the fact that he is a very aggressive deck, or aims to be at least, I think that I'm pretty safe tossing out my Heimerdinger. It was unlikely that I was going to Nightfall out my Aphelios by using Rummage, for example, because my hand is also very light on discardable cards. Given this choice, 3 spells kind of interesting. I think that, you know, taking Comet for like a GP or a Sejuani is totally valid. But this falling Meteor Shower, I guess, comes down a little bit early. Maybe I can 2 for 1. Doesn't seem too bad either. And again, this turn's kind of awkward. I don't really have a good way of Nightfalling out my Sejuani. But I think that if I play Temple this turn, I might have a chance of coming back, which is actually really interesting. And you're going to see kind of like the power level of Temple here, because even though I played Temple on turn 4 against an aggressive deck, I think that it still worked out for me in this case. Now, I really desperately need to get Aphelios down on board, and so I opt to finally use Rummage and take what I can get. I have the option of playing like Calibrum into Thermo Beam this turn, just so I can cycle into Gravitum. But I'm not sure if that's the best use of my mana. He's playing some really interesting cards here. Getting the Black Market Merchant from the Plunder. I opt to use the Calibrum on the Sparring Student. I think that it's likely that it can scale pretty high against his deck. And so I just want to keep the board slim and reduce as much damage as I can. And now I can opt to use this 1 mana Thermo Beam to kind of kill off the elusive. Getting the Severum from the Aphelios, it's actually really good because I don't think his deck runs too many ways of interacting with our board. And once I jam this Severum on this Aphelios, that could really discourage any attacks coming out of him. Now, unfortunately, he does play Sejuani, so if I go for a Severum, I'm only healing 1. But because his board state actually doesn't have a way to kill Aphelios besides the Sejuani, I can actually go for this Thermo Beam on the Sejuani, and my Aphelios is pretty much guaranteed to still be alive this turn. Now, you know, he still gets in a pretty wide attack onto my board, and I'm at pretty low health, but I still very quickly have this Severum. And, ooh, interesting. So I think that I didn't have the flexibility of playing Solari Priestess this turn. I kind of need to be a little bit more efficient in kind of clearing out the board here. And I think that I opt to just go for this. Do I? Let's see. I was thinking of using the Tri-Beam here to maybe like take down another one of his units, but we'll see what we end up doing. Attacking. Okay, interesting. So we just end up attacking with our fellows. Healing 6 is pretty good. Knowing that, you know, he doesn't go for like a Mystic Shot on stack here, it's pretty safe to say that whatever he took from me was also not very impactful. Looking back on this turn, I definitely would have started with a Solari Priestess, just so that this Tri-Beam is pumped up a little bit more. But this Chumpum is actually a little bit funny because, you know, as your deck, you do want some really cheap ways of just pumping out, or just being able to cast cards in order to like proc your tempo or to proc your Aphelios. Sisters here, of course, is a very great pickup because we are desperately in need of, some health gain to stabilize this board. And very critically, because we were saving this Gravam for a card like a GP or a Sejuani, we actually have it here to stop his attack as well. And very critically, stopping this GP from attacking means that he doesn't get to like blow up my board with his ability. I think he still has one more, or I still have one more bot in my deck, but I'm mostly just wanting to phase into Crescendum in order to phase into either Calibrum or Severum on the next phase as well. And I also think I'm pretty close to leveling up this Aphelios as well. Yeah, that's 3 out of 4. So this Crescendum should level up my Aphelios. Now, the only awkward part about running Temple is that it kind of clogs up one of your board spaces, so that this Sisters doesn't necessarily get full value. Now, of course, we're only mainly looking for the life gain Sister for its life gain, but losing out on the elusive Sister doesn't feel that great. And another point to be made here is that once you get into like this late game, you see that, I have not that many cards left. I don't actually have a very good use of the extra mana from the temple, and so around this point in the game, you can actually think about replacing temple with another unit here. This monkey Pandemonium is actually kind of interesting because he got vulnerable on my Aphelios. And he actually has a really cool line where he can use his ignition to buff his ballistic bot to 4, or I see. He used the warning shot. He didn't have any more ignitions, but now he can challenge my Aphelios. But unfortunately for him, I actually do have a Hush, which protects my Aphelios, and unfortunately that kind of spells really bad trouble for my opponent here, because now I finally have the board space to play Sisters, and his Gangplank is pretty much going to be stunned out here unless he open attacks with it, which is still pretty powerful. But this is our turn to finally drop the Sisters, and we can even Calibrum to clear out some units and phase into Severum if we need it as well. So Calibrum, pretty easy use on the Zap, not only just clearing out his unit, but also ensures that our elusive Sister gets an attack in. And of course, facing Severum, we can just stick it onto our Aphelios for some really, really sick life gain that, he probably doesn't really have a good, reliable way to stop. Finally, the hired gun comes down. Aphelios is most likely going to die next turn, but at least we cash in on this 9 juicy life gain. Now, this attack is a little bit interesting. We decide to drag the barrel with the life gain Sister, because we don't really want it to trade into his Gangplank, because his Gangplank is most likely trading with our Aphelios the next turn. But of course, the only downside here is that if he plays any kind of spell, we're denied the healing out off of the Sisters. So yeah, he warning shots here, which means that we don't get the gain from the Sisters, but I think that the 9 from Aphelios is still enough to really just stabilize this game. And of course, he couldn't block the Ballistic Bot with his Gangplank because we had cards like Dust Petal and the Shrooms in our hand. He even pulls out a Star Shaping from our deck, which could be really, really troublesome depending on what he picked up. He picked up like a big elusive or overwhelm and had a way to deal with mine, then we could be in a little bit of trouble. But because we face into Gravitum, he's kind of forced into an open attack here. Unless he pulls Living Legends and lands some actually absurd things. Nab, once again, a very annoying mechanic. But because of the fear of Gravitum, he's really forced into this attack here. Not much we can do. Goes through, kills a few of our stuff, kills Aphelios most importantly. But because we know that he doesn't have a very good way of dealing with our board, we can actually use our Give It All as like kind of a win condition backup. And because he also played Living Legend and has like 7 fleeting cards in his hand, we're pretty happy to just let him play out his cards first just to see what he does. Sisters is a pretty good card for him. It kind of ruins with our Give It All plan here. I was going to Tri-Beam into Give It All. And that would have given our board some pretty good stats. But the sisters might mean that I won't have lethal on the next swing. And I'm trying my best to end the game because I'm actually running quite low on cards right now. And we actually roll a Lonely Poro, which actually changes my plans a little bit more because I can stun the sisters with Gravitum this turn and develop Porofly, which also has Spell Shield. And if I give everything Spell Shield, I'm in a really dominant position. And this should be pretty close to the end. He has really no way of stopping this Give It All. And because I was able to go wide with the Tri-Beam into Porofly, he doesn't have any blockers for any of my elusives. Even if he kills 1 or 2 of my units, I have a really high attack card elusive board, and this pretty much spells out the end of this game. So Temple really kind of carried us through the early and mid game, and we were able to pull out the finish with Give It All again this game.